All right, welcome. Today we're digging into a piece of hidden history that is just fascinating. A story where spirituality and rebellion completely collide. We're going to uncover how practices that most people just dismiss as magic were actually a really powerful, sophisticated, and sometimes totally invisible weapon in the fight against colonialism. Okay, let's get into it.
So let's start with a big question. What if all those stories, the ones about curses and fairy forts and sacred rituals, what if they weren't just folklore? What if they were actually a blueprint for cultural survival? Today, we're going to challenge the stories we've all been told and really explore how magic became a strategic weapon against empire.
So here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with the big picture, looking at how this played out all over the world. Then, we're going to zoom way in on the incredible case of Ireland and Scotland, break down their amazing stealth tactics, and finally, connect it all to a legacy of defiance that is still very much alive today.
Okay, so to really get this, we have to understand something crucial. Colonialism wasn't just about grabbing land and resources. It was a war on knowledge. It was a full-on attempt to erase entire ways of seeing the world, entire ways of being. And that is exactly where magic comes in. You see, indigenous spiritual practices were what you could call a counter-epistemology. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but it's a powerful idea. It just means an alternative way of knowing. And this reframes everything, right? These weren't just simple beliefs. There were whole systems of knowledge, herbal medicine, cosmology, history, you name it, that kept cultural sovereignty alive and directly fought back against the colonial worldview.
And you know what's wild? This wasn't just happening in one little corner of the world. Not at all. It was a global phenomenon. From the Caribbean to Africa to the Americas, you see this clear blueprint for magical resistance pop up. And when you look closely, the same 5 functions appear again and again and again.
So this blueprint worked in 5 key ways. First, it was all about preserving forbidden knowledge. Next, it gave people cover to organize. I mean, the famous voodoo ceremony that kicked off the Haitian Revolution? That's a perfect example. From there, it was about defending their identity by protecting sacred places. It was also a way to subvert the system, like hiding African gods behind the faces of Catholic saints. And finally, and maybe most importantly, it offered psychological liberation. It gave people a sense of power and agency when they were facing the most brutal oppression.
And we absolutely have to talk about this part. The colonial attack on magic was deeply, deeply gendered. Colonizers knew what they were doing. They strategically targeted female healers, priestesses, and elders, slapping the label witches on them, all to dismantle matrilineal systems where women held so much social and spiritual power. Suppressing magic was a weapon for suppressing women.
Okay, so now let's take that global pattern and zoom way in to the really rich and subtle case study of the Gaelic world. Because here, the art of magical resistance was basically perfected into an invisible war. Colonial English law wasn't just stumbling around. It made a very deliberate, systematic effort to break Gaelic society by going after its knowledge holders. You had laws, like the penal laws in Ireland, that explicitly banned so-called sorcerers and charmers. This was a targeted strike meant to stamp out the druids, the bards, and the wise women who were, really, the glue holding their communities together. But the resistance was literally written into the landscape itself. Places like ancient fairy forts or holy wells, they became these spiritually charged battlegrounds. People would secretly maintain these sites. They'd leave offerings, perform rituals, often in direct defiance of colonial landlords who just wanted to fence everything off and cut that deep, ancient Gaelic connection to the land.
And that brings us to the specific methods, the really clever covert tactics that the Irish and Scots used to fight back from the shadows.
They basically had a whole toolkit of stealth resistance, and each tactic was designed to hide in plain sight. Oh, your fence broke overnight? Must have been the fairies. Need to take down a corrupt official? A bard could unleash a powerful curse. Got to hold a secret meeting? Well, just organize a pilgrimage to a holy well. All these small acts, from hidden charms to public fasting, created this constant, unnerving spiritual pressure. Let's look closer at the Glam Dion, because this is just amazing. This wasn't just poetry, it was magical warfare. Bards were these hugely respected figures, and their satirical curses were believed to have real, actual power, to destroy an official's reputation, cause them terrible distress, and even make them physically sick. It was literally waging psychological war with words.
And then you have something called the piasog. This was your low-level, totally deniable magical sabotage. Someone might sneak over and leave some knotted threads or hide a few eggs on a landlord's property.
The whole point was to cause bad luck, make their cattle sick, or ruin their crops. It was this constant, unnerving pressure that was applied right under the colonizers' nose.
And here is the absolute genius of the whole strategy. The key to all of it was plausible deniability. Because the English authorities just dismissed all these Gaelic beliefs as primitive, as irrational superstition, they were completely blind to how it was being used strategically against them. They underestimated their enemy, and that arrogance became the very weapon that was used against them.
Now, this isn't just some dusty old history. This spirit of magical resistance, this whole legacy of defiance, is very much alive. It's echoing in some really powerful ways, right up to this very day.
I mean, just look at the great 20th century Scottish Gaelic poet, Sorley MacLean. He completely embodied this spirit. For him, writing in Gaelic wasn't just art, it was a profoundly political, radical act. He was using the language itself as a kind of spell to resurrect a suppressed history and call on the presence of his ancestors.
And you can draw a straight line from the past to the present. It's amazing. The historical tactic of defending sacred sites from landlords, it's the exact same spiritual principle that modern activists are using when they invoke the power of fairy forts to protest and even stop big construction projects today.
And it's the same thing with the language. That ancient tradition of bardic poetry as linguistic defiance lives on in the modern movement to revitalize the Irish and Scottish Gaelic languages. For a lot of people, learning and speaking the language is framed as an act of breaking England's curse, a magical act of undoing colonial damage.
You know, the great Jamaican poet Louise Bennett Coverley said it perfectly. These traditions, they might be suppressed, they might be forced underground, but they are never ever truly dead. They always endure.
So what's the big takeaway from all of this? It's that magic, in this context, was never escapism. It was a practical, intelligent, and deeply strategic blueprint for liberation and for cultural survival. It was created by people who turned their invisibility into armor and their spirituality into a weapon. So that leaves us with one final thought. If this is the blueprint, using suppressed knowledge, using ritual, using a connection to the land as tools for liberation, where else can you see its influence playing out in the world, right now? Where are people using their own hidden histories to fight for justice and survival today? It's a powerful thing to think about. Thanks for joining us.